All right, hi everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Pinniped Community Meeting. Reminder to please read and abide by our code of conduct when attending these meetings. It is being recorded and uploaded to our YouTube playlist. So whenever, after we're done with this meeting, they are typically added to the YouTube playlist within 48 hours. We meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you are watching one of these recordings at home, we hope you do attend one of these live meetings at one of those available times on the first and third Thursday of the month. If you do have anything you would like to add to the agenda to discuss with the Pinniped maintainers, please add that to the discussion topics down here below. Today's date is May 6, 2021, which means it's also the week of KubeCon. So we hope you have enjoyed another lovely week of virtual KubeCon, and Pinniped participated a little bit. We did have office hours this morning, and we have a demo that is playing at the VMware virtual booth. You can click on that here in the announcement section to check out that demo. And next we have our status updates on the project roadmap. So previously we had device code flow as April 2021, but it looks like that has been moved to more exploring and ongoing. So I wanted to give a little bit of update on that. Matt or anyone?
Yeah, I can talk about why we moved that.
Okay.
We had this theory that some users won't be able to use our current flow because of device firewall, like on a Windows machine or something like that, that won't be able to open the listening port that we use right now. We realized as we got into starting to design this and scope it out that we hadn't really validated that with real users. So I still think it's likely that we'll do this, but it's sort of put it back on the back burner until we can get some real customer feedback and understand exactly why we're building it. And then it'll probably move back up in the roadmap.
I was going to mention that we did have at least one person have not necessarily an exact use case, but they were trying to use a jump box. So they didn't have a browser in the jump box, so they couldn't log in. So, I mean, you can log into it on a different machine and copy session files over, and that does work. But
yeah, the jump box thing, like one of the things we wanted to validate is if we just did device code flow, that would mean that the place where you're running the CLI, like the jump box, it needs to have network connectivity to your workload cluster and to the supervisor. And then wherever you click and open the link, like in your browser, also needs to have access to the supervisor. And basically we're wondering if device code flow actually solves that scenario or not, or if the cases where you're using a jump box, maybe the supervisor is also kind of like on the network, private network behind the jump box. You actually can't use your browser locally in that case. In which case the alternate solution, which you could actually do today, is like some sort of SSH port forwarding to get that local host port on the jump box to be also a local host port on your desktop. But anyway, yeah, like I think we understand in theory like what the use cases are, and we have definitely people who want to use jump boxes. The other kind of like scenario about like host firewalls, we haven't actually encountered with one of our users yet. So if anybody's watching this and you have a use case, like put it in the issue.
Great, thanks Matt and Mo. And then on to the next roadmap item, we have LDAP support. Looks like the main PR is nearly ready to merge.
Yeah, I can give an update on this too, or Margo if you want to. You worked on this more than I did. The main, there's a feature branch right now that has LDAP support. It's working, it's tested, integration tested, supports login and supports getting your user identity. all the way through the whole system. It all works. There's a few code review items left on that branch that we need to address. And we've also been sort of keeping it in a unmerged branch just in case we wanted to release the current main branch because it has some other bug fixes right now that we might want to release. There's also a PR that adds support for the LDAP IDP type in the git kubectl command, so that you can, when you have an LDAP identity provider, you can also use git kubectl to get the kubectl and not have to do any manual work. And then there's some issues that are still open and haven't been started yet around adding support for start TLS, which should be a relatively small change. Adding support for group search, which should be a small to medium change, I think. I think that's it. And then I think we were going to call this done for version 1. Unless anybody else has anything else I forgot. It's close. I think it's going to definitely happen in May. And that will be probably 0.80, although like I said, if we might decide to ship what we have on main right now and call it 0.80 and then call 0.90 LDAP support. We'll see. Every time we do any of these things, I always regret putting version numbers against our milestones until just in time. Yeah, and then in documentation, I can talk about too. Margot shipped a big docs update last week. We have a new documentation page about how to use GitLab as an IDP. It's pretty cool, super easy. I think that's it. I think that's it for status updates.
Okay, great. I was having trouble getting off mute. Thanks for that, Matt. As far as this discussion topics go, looks like we have a couple inputs in there. Margot, refresh flow issues in VO.4.x.
Yeah, so we kind of discovered some surprising behavior in the refresh flow, where we expect that for as long as your refresh token is valid, you can use it. We realized we had, currently it's 9 hours. We store secrets related to the access token and refresh token information, and the access token only lasts 15 minutes, and that secret was getting garbage collected soon after that. And this was causing problems because the library that we are using to handle our OIDC stuff, Faucite, was expecting it to exist so that it could revoke that secret, but since we had already deleted it, that was causing errors. So we are, yes, we've just figured out what the problem is. Haven't really made any progress on that fix, but it should be pretty small.
I did think of one thing, Margot, that might make it a little bit larger, which is, I don't know, maybe this isn't a problem. I'm trying to think of if you could somehow, maybe it's not a problem in practice. I was thinking of the case if you have like many access tokens over time. If you have more than one access token associated with a session, like that session ID, all but the newest one should be garbage collectible immediately.
Sure.
So theoretically, we could have another variation of the garbage collector that doesn't look at TTLs, but it instead looks at session IDs and builds up us like an ordered list per session ID. And for any list that has more than one item, it deletes everything that isn't the last thing in the list. That maybe that doesn't matter in practice. I was just trying to think of it in my head if that actually happens in practice.
Yeah, if
I don't know if it does.
yeah, I thought the access token, you're talking about like if you had one access token and then you go through the refresh flow and you need a new one, would that old one stick around? And kind of
Well, what I was trying to think of, is there any flow where you go through a series of refreshes over time and get new access tokens and get new refresh tokens, in which you could leave anything behind? I don't know. I don't think there is. I think it's written in a way, like Fosight's written in a way that if it sends you a new access token and a new refresh token, it's already deleted everything first before actually sending you that data.
I think that's true, but
Maybe I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I think that security property is actually important for anything we're doing, but I think that is how Faucet works because we implement the delete interface. Like it's you can also build a valid Faucet storage backend that just no ops on delete, I think. Like you just don't get this property. And I would honestly be fine if we ever decided that we wanted to refactor our storage to be stateless and like not actually be storage, but just be signing. And in having a token that encodes all the information that we would have stored. Like I would be fine with that. I don't think we would be really missing out on any important security properties. But that's not what we have right now. Right now we have like something that implements everything, and I think it should work the same way Faucet expects. And I think you're right. I think it like always deletes the access tokens whenever it's refreshing.
Yeah, but so to be on the actual HackMD doc, this refresh flow actually exists in all versions of Pinniped, not just 4X, right? It's because we have a garbage collection time that happens too soon. So basically, if you log in and get an access token and a refresh token, and you wait like 20 minutes without doing anything, your access token has expired and has been garbage collected for sure. Or you try to do something, we try to refresh your token because it doesn't work. And in the refresh response at the very end, before it'll give you a new refresh and access token, it wants to revoke everything, and it fails to revoke the access token because it's already gone. And because of that, it refuses to give you a new refresh token, so the flow fails, and we have to open it.
So there's actually, is there an error message when it fails to do that delete?
Not to the user.
Okay, it sounds like what we need to do is add it. Maybe you already said this, but add a case that says if you delete something and you get a 404 error, that's fine. It's deleted. Like that's a okay case. If Faucet tells us to delete an access token, we go to delete it and it's not there. That's fine. It was already deleted.
I mean, yeah, we could do it that way. I was kind of leaning towards we just don't tell the garbage collector to garbage collect until after the refresh lifetime is done, and then it can go garbage collect. So we'll hold on to some data for a bit longer.
That'd be okay too. Or we could actually, yeah, basically have the garbage collector only work on refresh tokens, but link the owner references sort of. I know our garbage collector doesn't actually use owner references, but basically use the link the access tokens to be owned by the refresh token.
Well, what I was thinking is I don't think it matters. Like if we extend the life to be the equivalent, the garbage collection life to be the equivalent of the refresh token, as you use it, it'll get incrementally garbage collected. So we're not leaving anything around.
I see, yeah. So all we do in that case is we're literally just changing the timeout value that the garbage collector uses to delete those.
yeah, the only thing is like the last, if you actually let it expire at the end of your day, it's going to be around for 9 hours rather than 15 minutes after your.
But it's okay, right? Like for each session, for you to have both an access token and a refresh token for the whole time of the session, just one of each, it's totally fine.
Mhm.
Like that's not an issue, because as you keep refreshing, you get new access token, new refresh token, old one gets deleted.
Yeah,
And it's not a, doesn't change any security properties because the access token still has a expiration time.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually useful for anything. All that matters is just the amount of storage it takes up. And we're talking
I
about
don't think it actually uses any more storage either, right? Because every time you refresh, you delete everything.
Oh yeah. Only in the case it uses, if I log in and then
don't-
wait 30 minutes.
Yeah.
In
that
that
case,
at that point in time, my session includes a refresh token and an access token that I didn't actually need to store anymore.
Yep.
We're saving like a few kilobytes in etcd or something.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it matters in practice. And at the end, and at the very end of your session, when it's both the refresh token and the access token no longer makes sense, we'll garbage collect both of them, and it's fine. So like we're not accumulating crap over time, right?
It sounds like we understand more about this now enough to file a bug, because I don't think we actually have a bug upstream for this.
Yeah.
We had an idea that there was going to be a bug, and thanks for
yes.
finding it.
Yeah,
I guess that's an action item, is to file that bug.
yeah, I can take that.
Thanks, Margo.
Yeah, thanks for finding that and doing all. It was a lot of work to get set up to find it. So
Yeah, the hardest part was setting up the environment for sure.
I guess another thing to mention, I think the reason we didn't catch this in CI is because we don't have tests that last longer than the access token timeout.
Yeah,
We have tests that simulate it by deleting access tokens, but that doesn't trigger this
yeah.
behavior.
I'm kind of, yeah, I'm surprised we didn't catch it in acceptance or something. Just like, I guess we probably tested it at 16 minutes and thought that was like, that's awesome. It's past the access token lifetime, and weren't thinking about garbage collection, because that's.
Yeah, this is maybe a kind of bug that we would have only caught in like a soak test. If we have a continuously running test environment, and we could write some tests that take 9 hours to run and just run continuously.
Yeah.
And we could also do like kind of load testing that way, like make sure that when you're running against the server and you have a steady stream of hundreds of thousands of logins per hour or whatever, that like things don't tip over.
Moira, do you happen to remember why our access token lifetime is 15 minutes instead of 5 minutes?
No, I don't.
Okay.
It may have been related to how we didn't have caching before, but we do now.
Okay, well, we should make that 5 minutes, because there's no need for it to be that long.
Yeah.
And so if we make it 5 minutes, we can write an integration test for this case that doesn't take 20 minutes.
There's also the cluster specific ID tokens that you get back from the STS endpoint. I think they are 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just don't see any reason for it to be longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah, in fact, now that we have good caching of the exec credential like certificates,
yeah,
you actually don't need any of these things to be longer than just about like 30 seconds, probably, because you're using it essentially one time against a cluster to get a certificate. The certificate is valid for 5 minutes. When the certificate expires, you're going to go back and do another thing. If we don't want to line them up exactly, because then it's like really non-deterministic what's going to happen. Like it'll sometimes need to refresh and sometimes not, which sounds bad. I would rather just say all the token lifetimes are actually shorter than the certificate lifetime, so that in the normal case, every time your certificate expires, you go through a refresh flow.
Yeah, I could buy that. Yeah, I don't know if that's a separate issue, but I would like to see that change. I think that makes sense.
What I was thinking about too when we did the caching stuff was, now that we have the cache on the certificate, we could actually even stop storing access tokens and stop storing ID tokens and the cluster ID tokens in the session cache, and simplify the format of the session cache to literally only have refresh tokens. Because every time you read from the cache, you're almost always going to be in that refresh case anyway. We could eliminate a bunch of code and complexity and like if statements if we just assume that we're always going to go through the refresh flow. And the only thing that breaks in that mode is if you're using a non-Pinniped and not the supervisor, using some IDP, OIDC IDP directly, which is a case that we support, but it's not like a really core use case. In that case, you might want to cache the access tokens because they might be valid for a pretty long time, like a few hours.
Well,
And you might not have refresh flow support offline scope.
I thought the way you wrote the cache fixing was that you cached the last credential, whatever the last credential was, whether it was a cert or not.
Yeah, but it might be the difference between, so imagine I'm using like, let's just say like Okta as a IDP. Oh, hi, Scott. Imagine I'm using like Okta as an OIDC IDP directly with the concierge.
Yeah.
In that mode, I might have Okta configured to give me like a couple hours long access and ID tokens. I'm using them with a cluster every 5 minutes. The cluster is going to need a new cert, but I'm not going to actually have to log in with my browser except every few hours because in that mode, I might not have a refresh token or might not have a scope that lets me use the refresh flow. Anyway, like I said, I don't think this is a core use case. I think if we could simplify the code a bunch and like remove support for that, I'd be okay maybe doing that. It's a little hard to argue though, because we do have the code that supports that now. So it's a little complicated. I would feel great cleaning it up, but.
Yeah. All right, so maybe there's 3 distinct issues, right? There's the actual bug. There's another issue to shorten all these lifetimes to, at least in the supervisor, to whatever actually makes sense with our caching. Third issue for decide if we want to keep supporting the not supervisor OIDC upstream and the concierge, or not the concierge, but the CLI, or how we want to support it at the caching level, basically. I think those are 3 distinct issues. Right, so.
Okay. I just took some notes. I don't know. Feel free to refine those. I think we can move on to the last topic here. I wanted to just mention this because I don't think I've been working on this for a little while now, and we don't actually have anything at GitHub about this yet. But one thing that we realized after releasing 0.7.0, and we added support for this impersonation proxy. And the way it works is it automatically detects when you install the concierge on a cluster that has no control plane nodes. So it has like the Kubernetes control plane hosted where we can't see it. Like this is the case on GKE and Google, and AKS on Azure, and EKS on Amazon, and then also true on some other types of clusters. And when we're in that mode, the default thing we do is we auto detect that, and we start up a load balancer service. And we start serving this impersonation proxy. And we have all this code on the client side to detect this and like give you a kube config that routes through the impersonation proxy. It all works great. And we tested this on all the default configurations for all these cloud provider managed Kubernetes clusters. It works great. What we didn't test or consider is if you have a cloud provider managed cluster from like one of these big 3 cloud providers, but you have the cluster control plane in a private network, which is something you can do on all 3 major cloud providers. Either in the case where you have it literally on a private subnet, like an RFC 1918 private IP range, or also in the case where you have it on a public IP, but with like security group rules or firewall ingress rules that limit the scope of who can connect to it. When you deploy the concierge on one of those clusters, it opens this load balancer service, and it turns out that on some of these cloud providers, even though your cluster is a private cluster, the default load balancer is a public load balancer. And so what we've effectively done in those scenarios is open up a public proxy, public IP proxy to your private cluster, which is probably not what you wanted. It's not like a catastrophic security mistake because everything's authenticated. You know, we're still talking about like MTLS, but it's probably not what people would want in that case. And so we're trying to figure out what to do to fix this. And I mean, honestly, probably the solution is going to be, this becomes a feature that needs a little bit of manual control, so that we have to know something about the user's intention when they installed Pinniped. Like, did they intend to open this public proxy? If so, that's fine. It's honestly not a problem for most people. Or would you rather turn that feature off, which might be something we need to support? Or do you want a mode where we run the listening proxy, but we don't provision the load balancer in front of it? And so that's up to you to deploy manually. Anyway, this is a little unfortunate because it makes this super easy default automatic feature into something that is no longer quite as automatic. So that's a little disheartening, but I think it's probably the right thing to do. There, I don't know if anybody else has thoughts. I thought I'd just give a status update there. I also have an action item, which is I need to file my findings on this as well.
From what I remember, it's all done through annotations in AKS and whatnot. If you want a private load balancer or not, could that be added into the concierge deployment, basically, where you could add load balancer annotations as an option?
Yeah, I thought about that too. I think I haven't looked at the Azure ones. I think on EKS, you can add an annotation, but you have to add like the subnet ID that you want it to be provisioned in, and we don't have a way of auto detecting that. So another kind of like semi-manual, semi-automatic thing we could do is we could say provide an API field, probably in the credential issuer object, where you can give us some annotations, and we will put those annotations on the load balancer service we create. That would be probably not that hard to add as a feature, but it also you can get something similar if we just say like, if you need some sort of custom configuration on your load balancer service, that's fine. Just like define it outside of Pinniped itself and point it at a particular label selector.
I got to drop. I was just going to mention one thing. Technically, the way the code is written today, if you go mess with the service after we've created it, we don't reconcile it back. So if you wanted to go add annotations, you could go do that today and it would technically work, probably. Not saying that's like supported or well-formed as an API.
Yeah, there is also not an API, but an internal configuration knob that we use for testing where you can actually like do all the things I mentioned already. It's a part of what we might be doing to fix this is take that kind of internal config map knob and promote it to a proper API. And I'm actually pretty glad that we didn't do that already, because I think we understand this particular use case a lot better. And I'm sure that we can factor that into the API design more than we would have.
I am really bummed about turning this into like a thing that you have to manually do though.
Yeah, my feeling is we can probably leave the default the way it is on the git.pinniped.com/install-concierge.yaml, like the default install bundle, I think can still have this behavior. Because if you're a user, you're sitting down and I'm typing the command to install Pinniped and I'm watching it install, I think we'll put a little warning in the docs probably to tell you this is going to happen because it's not obvious. I think that's probably still the right default behavior. We just need to make sure that there are other use cases where you're like deploying the concierge across a whole fleet of clusters, and you probably want the default to be the safer default.
I mean, it is great that we talked about, hey, we're not going to put these, knobs on our public API because we haven't validated that people need them. And now we've kind of gotten validation that people need them.
Okay, anything further to discuss on this issue or anything else that's come up?
I think just one last thing on the impersonation proxy from my side. Has anything else been thought about in terms of the support for the TKGI type clusters where I have control plane nodes but don't have a kube controller manager, a way of manually saying I want an impersonation proxy instead of it being auto detect in order to support that type of a Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, that's another case. I think we also are looking specifically at a couple of cluster types that we don't support by default right now, including TKGI and probably OpenShift. I think it just needs a little tweak. So another thing we might do for TKGI is, I think there's just some small tweaks about how we could basically use the kubecert agent flow on those clusters and make that work. And then on OpenShift, the sort of the signing key that we're looking for is actually in a Kubernetes secret. So it's really trivial to get access to it. We just need to write a little piece of code that detects that secret's available on OpenShift and goes and grabs the key. And that's something I think we have in our backlog. TKGI support specifically, though, is something that it's also on our backlog. Yeah, and the thing you asked specifically to it, yeah, I think we have this internal config map kind of control surface right now where you can one thing you can do is you can force the impersonation proxy to be on, and we do that in testing. It lets us test this whole thing in kind. You can force the proxy to turn on in kind when it otherwise wouldn't. So I'm sure that will make it into the proper API as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and I think the current plan is we'll put these new settings on the spec of the credential issuer. So right now we have this credential issuer object that's right now is only sort of like a write-only API. Like you install Pinniped, and Pinniped, the concierge, creates a credential issuer and starts updating its status. We use it as like a place to store our status, basically. But I think with this change, we'll add a spec section that has these settings in it. And then probably also we'll take that credential issuer, and instead of just automatically creating from the concierge, we'll just create it in the install YAML. I think that makes the most sense. So it's more like the concierge configuration that you're passing in. And who knows, maybe we'll rename the type eventually too. But yeah. Hopefully these are all, I hope these are all pretty small changes. There's a possibility also with these two bugs that we might decide to, maybe this is a good topic. We might decide to try and fix these two bugs and ship those fixes along with some of the other fixes that we have as 0.8.0 and actually hold LDAP back for another release. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think the garbage collection bug seems like a good one to do soon. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. It seems useful. Cool. I think that's it for today, unless anybody else has other topics.
Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for the excellent discussion. If you're watching this from home, our next time that we are meeting is May 20th. We meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So we do encourage you to attend one of these live. If you have any questions for the maintainer team, they're happy to help guide you in any way. We also encourage you to join our Kubernetes Slack channel, which is just hashtag Pinniped, and you can also find us there, as well as Twitter which is Pinniped Dev, or Project Pinniped, and hopefully we will get to engage with you in one of those opportunities and see you next time. All right, thank you, everyone.